206,000 lives. This is the estimated number of lives lost in the Iraq War between 2001 to 2011. But what you don't know is the estimated $60 billion that was made during this period from private military contractors, arms dealers, and other entities involved in the war. You've probably seen the headlines, read the news, and heard the stories about the devastating impact of war on communities and individuals around the world. But what you may not know is beyond the human toll of conflict, there's another hidden cost of wars. In order to truly understand the hidden costs of armed conflicts, we need to trace our way back to its very origins. Throughout history, wars have been fought not only for ideological or strategic reasons, but also for financial gain. One of the earliest examples of war profiteering can be found in ancient Greece. During the Peloponnesian War, which took place between 431 and 404 BCE, Athenian merchants raised the price of goods and services to take advantage of the war and make huge profits. As time went on, war profiteering became even more common during the Middle Ages. This is because the rise of mercenary armies created a booming market for arms dealers and other merchants, who sold supplies and services to these armies. This trend continued into the modern era, with the growth of military-industrial complexes in the 20th century leading to a massive increase in war profiteering, as arms manufacturers and other companies benefited from the production and sale of weapons and other military equipment. It's safe to say that history really does repeat itself. The problem, however, is that where there is war profiteering, there are also war crimes. War crimes are defined as any act that violates the international humanitarian law and are committed during armed conflicts. These crimes can include murder, torture, rape, and other forms of violence against civilians and non-combatants. One of the first war crimes that we know of happened in ancient Rome, where it was common to burn, sack, and pillage cities that had been conquered by the Roman armies. In almost every major war in history, both sides have committed war crimes. During World War II, the Nazi regime committed some of the most heinous war crimes in history, including the Holocaust, in which millions of Jews and other minorities were systematically exterminated. In a similar way, the Japanese military did horrible things to civilians and prisoners of war. For example, the infamous rape of Nanking killed more than 300,000 Chinese civilians. The challenge is to ensure that there is transparency and accountability in all aspects of military operations. This is where international laws and treaties come into play. One of the most significant and well-known treaties are the Geneva Conventions. First established in 1864, the conventions were created to protect victims of armed conflicts and provide guidelines for the treatment of prisoners of war, the wounded, and civilians. For this reason, the conventions have helped to establish a framework for the treatment of prisoners of war, prohibiting torture and inhumane treatment and protecting civilians in times of war. In addition to the Geneva Conventions, the Arms Trade Treaty, for example, was established in 2013 and seeks to regulate the international trade of conventional weapons, such as guns and tanks, to prevent their use in human rights abuses and violations of international law. The International Criminal Court was also established to prosecute individuals for war crimes, from civilians caught in the crossfire to refugees fleeing their homes and soldiers who are traumatized by their experiences. The impact of war is felt by all. There have been numerous examples throughout history of companies and individuals who have profited from wars and committed war crimes. During the Iraq War, Halliburton and its subsidiary KBR were contracted by the US government to provide logistical support to troops. The companies were accused of engaging in war profiteering as they charged exorbitant fees for their services and were accused of overbilling the government for their work. In addition, KBR was accused of providing substandard services such as contaminated water and unsafe living conditions to troops and civilians. In 2005, a whistleblower revealed that KBR had been involved in the electrocution of US soldiers in Iraq due to faulty electrical work. But a bigger villain in the story is Eric Prince, who started the private military company Blackwater back in 1997. The US government hired Blackwater to provide security services in Iraq and Afghanistan. Blackwater was accused of committing war crimes, including the killing of 17 Iraqi civilians in Nizar Square in 2007. The incident sparked international outrage and led to increased scrutiny of private military contractors operating in conflict zones. Prince and Blackwater were also accused of engaging in illegal arms smuggling, as well as bribery and corruption. In 2010, Prince sold Blackwater to a group of investors who then renamed the company to Z Services LLC. This was, in large part, thanks to Blackwater's violations being exposed to the entire world through the power of media and public discourse. The media plays a critical role in uncovering and reporting on war profiteering and war crimes. We previously mentioned the media's role in exposing Blackwater. However, another example is the Afghanistan Papers, a series of articles published by the Washington Post in 2019 that exposed the US government's mismanagement of the war in Afghanistan. The articles detailed how US officials misled the public about the progress of the war and how billions of dollars were wasted on poorly planned and executed projects. The articles also exposed the role of private contractors in the war effort and how their actions contributed to the overall failure of the mission. Holding war profiteers and war criminals accountable for their actions is a complex and challenging task, especially when it comes to effective enforcement mechanisms. One example of profiteering and war crimes perpetrators not being convicted is the case of DynCorp International, a private military contractor that was accused of human trafficking and facilitating child prostitution in Bosnia in the late 1990s. Despite substantial evidence of wrongdoing, including internal company emails and witness statements, no DynCorp employees were ever charged with a crime. The US government initially launched an investigation into the allegations, but the case was ultimately dropped, and DynCorp continued to receive government contracts. The same is the case of the Abu Ghraib prison abuse scandal during the Iraq War. Despite numerous photographs and video evidence showing US military personnel engaging in torture and abuse of detainees at the prison, only a handful of low-ranking soldiers were convicted and sentenced to prison time. Many of the individuals responsible for the abuse were never charged, including high-ranking military officials and private contractors who were involved in the interrogation of prisoners. The lack of accountability for those responsible for the abuses at Abu Ghraib have been criticized by human rights groups and legal experts. International organizations like the International Criminal Court also face significant challenges in bringing war profiteers and war criminals to justice due to many reasons. The ICC has jurisdiction over only those crimes committed in states that have ratified the Rome Statute, which established the court. Additionally, the ICC has no police force or enforcement mechanism of its own. It relies on cooperation from states to arrest and transfer suspects to its custody. If states refuse to cooperate, the ICC has limited options to ensure that suspects are brought to justice. Even if we somehow overcome all of these challenges, there are several political and diplomatic obstacles that can prevent the international community from taking action against war profiteers and war criminals. Powerful countries can use their influence to block or slow down efforts to hold war criminals accountable. They may use their position on the UN Security Council to veto resolutions that call for action against war criminals. Another barrier is governments being reluctant to take action against their own citizens or military personnel accused of war crimes or profiteering. The history of war profiteering and crimes dates back thousands of years, and, unless curbed, may continue on for another 1,000. With individuals and corporations profiting from conflicts and engaging in illegal activities, such as theft, bribery, and human rights violations. The impact on affected populations is devastating, including loss of life, displacement, and poverty. Possible solutions include improving international cooperation, strengthening legal frameworks, and increasing public awareness. War profiteering and war crimes have devastating consequences on affected populations and undermine the pursuit of peace and stability in conflict zones. As citizens, we have a responsibility to become informed about the hidden costs of wars and support efforts to promote peace and justice. With that said, thanks for staying with us to the end, and if you enjoyed this insight, then make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out on more content like this, and be sure to check out the video on the screen. Until next time, stay healthy, stay focused, and stay tuned.